Hello guys, and welcome back to Chapter by Chapter. We're still working our way through the very beginning of King of Scars, and today we have another Nina chapter in store. You all know I love Nina.
She is my queen. She is my favorite.
So I don't know if I'm just biased or if her chapters are just getting really good. So after that whole little
Incident
in Elling, they're making their way toward the town that the women at the cannery were talking about, the place with the tainted water where it's gone bad. As they're getting closer, Nina's finding it really difficult to ignore all of these voices that are in her head. They're starting to become varied, where they're growing very loud or they're starting to become a little more muffled. And then in her head, as all of this is happening, she hears Matthias say,
tell them.
and she's not really sure if she should tell Audric or Leonie about the voices she's hearing in her head. Let's think about it. Even in Harry Potter, they said that hearing voices in your head isn't even part of the wizarding world. That's still a little bit off. Ever since she overcame her addiction and her one-time use to Perem, she's not even sure if what she's hearing are hallucinations or if they're actually the voices
of the dead.
As they're approaching, they're realizing that this fort turned factory is being used for something completely different these days. And I'm just wondering what. Like, everything surrounding this factory is just so much of a mystery to me. I cannot wait to find out what's going on. So they approach this inn only to find out that it's full, but the owner tells them that all of these soldiers came in a year ago, they didn't hire any of the locals, and ever since the water's gone bad. As he says, they poured filth into the river. Like I mentioned back in the other Nina chapter, they're seeing signs of saints all over Fjerda, which is pretty unusual because usually they only worship their one god, Delge.
Delge?
And he's wondering if this is somehow an act of rebellion of the people in the town, since they're really unhappy with the soldiers in the factory. The innkeeper says that they're all full, but he says that usually the convent lets people stay there. And it's on the outskirts of town, and it's right downslope from the factory. When they get there and they're talking to the well mother, Nina poses as a translator, and she says that Leonie and Audric are a merchant couple. So the well mother is giving them all of the rules of the convent and how everything operates. She tells them that the doors are locked at a certain time at night and they're not reopened until the morning. Honestly, I don't know if it's me just trying to guess what's going on with this factory and why the water is tainted, but pretty much everything that is even slightly suspicious, I'm assuming has to do with it all. Aside the fact that they might want to lock the doors to keep all of the women safe in the convent,
it just seems a little fishier than that to me.
the well mother also tells them that some of the women staying there will eventually be spring maidens, and that everyone else that's there has been sent by their families or husbands to be educated. I can only imagine what a convent in Fjerda is considering education for young women.
Respect your husband.
Like probably something like that. The well mother also tells them that water is rationed, and that's throwing up big red flags to everybody. And the well mother covers this up by saying that it's a really good time for quiet contemplation. And this is so suspicious to me. At this point, I'm fully believing that all of these nuns, or most of them, at least the ones that are higher up, know exactly what's going on. But a part of me wonders, as women in Fjerda, would they even be allowed to say no to whatever is going on at the factory? Would they even be able to fight back? So while they're getting settled, Nina notices that Leonie and Audric are flirting a lot, and she says that it's basically going to kill her. It's one thing to have happiness and lose it, but it's a completely other thing to basically have two people right in front of your face falling for each other. She compares it to an unwanted second slice of cake, and at that moment I was like,
Nina doesn't say no to any kind of sweets.
and she even says, but when do I say no to a second slice of cake? So they end up deciding to take a walk and to try to get as close to the factory to see if they can see what's going on. As they're getting closer, the voices in Nina's head are growing louder and louder. And they notice that there's a large reservoir behind the factory. Nina wonders if the water is being used for cooling down some type of heavy machinery, which has me wondering what on earth is going on in there. Because it's obviously not being used as the type of factory that it was before these soldiers came. And what makes me even more suspicious is that Audric mentions that it's at this great vantage point. It's on the high ground, so it's either a really good place to take shelter against an attack, or if the river ever spills its banks, it won't be affected. Which I just think is a ton of foreshadowing, like
Foreshadowing.
And Nina talks about the might of their god and thinks the wellspring, the wrath of the river. So in this moment, I'm like, are these soldiers somehow harboring Grisha? Are they the ones that are progressing Fjerda's technologies? Because Nikolai had no idea how they were progressing so fast. Is a Grisha going to come and see what's going on and start to flood where this village is? And they also notice that there are two smokestacks that are blowing this blue-gray smoke.
Which is probably something suspicious.
There's also covered wagons constantly going in and out. And they're wondering what's going in and out, and I'm wondering what's going in and out. So they're still talking and trying to figure out what to do, and they come up with a plan for Leonie to take samples from the river. Even though she doesn't have quite the right equipment to do everything, Audric makes this comment about like,
oh, you could take whatever we have around and be able to do anything with it.
and this is still killing Nina slowly. Even though Leonie's really resourceful, she says it'll take her some time to be able to do all of the tests she wants without drawing suspicion. And Nina says, we just need about a week. After they're talking about how long they're going to be staying, Audric tries to slowly bring up the burial of Matthias. And in this moment, the voices in her head are really starting to rise, but she just shuts them out. She realizes that this isn't enemy territory. This is just a nice little town where people will start to make families. Then she thinks if Matthias was alive, that this town would be a great compromise for where they would both want to live. She knew that she would want to live in a big, bustling city. And Matthias would definitely have wanted to stay in a really small town, probably as far off the grid as possible. Even though this town would have been a great place for them to settle down, she's not sure if they would have ever really been safe anywhere. Would people have been looking for both of them their entire lives? And then Matthias's voice comes to her again and says that it's time to return him to his god. But the gods that the Fjerdans worship is said to have built the ice court, and that he's supposed to work through all of the ash trees. So it's very important for them to be buried near an ash tree so they can take root and be returned to their god. Eventually in the books, Matthias ends up thinking that maybe their god was Grisha, and that was how he had the power to create the ice court and do all of the miracles that he was said to have done. So because of this, Nina lets them know that it's going to take her a couple of days to find the right spot to bury him, but that she's ready to do it. Just saying this breaks her heart and brings her a lot of pain. So as they're talking, they end up hearing soldiers, and they end up following the sounds to a meadow. They see a group of soldiers standing around the stream, and they realize that one of the soldiers actually has their foot stuck in the stirrup and is being dragged around by their horse. Leonie says that she's pretty good with horses, that she could help them out. Audric's like, we should just leave them alone. It's really not our business. And then Nina out loud says, oh, this is one less soldier for us to deal with. Even in her head, Matthias is like,
Nina.
And Leonie and Audric even disapprove, and she herself disapproves too. We learned that when Nina lost Matthias, she lost a piece of herself and she felt broken. And she lost the part of her that cared. It leaves her asking questions like most of us would when experiencing a death of a loved one. What is the point of all of this? Why did we end up saving all of these people just for Matthias to die? Why do all of these soldiers get to live when Matthias, who was such a good person, is gone? And Matthias is just reassuring her in her mind, telling her that she's strong and that his death will not defeat her. Once they approach this group of soldiers, they end up realizing that they're not even soldiers at all. They're a group of women dressed in their uniforms. Eventually, they put it together that these are women from the convent that they're staying at. And like we found out at the beginning of the chapter, it's these women that do the soldiers' laundry. So they stole their uniforms and went up to this open meadow to kind of play dress up. As they're approaching, this really tall girl comes up to them, and she's already extremely defensive. And Nina starts to take in a lot of details about her. In the way that the details were written, I was like,
Nina's really taking notice of her.
it says that she's at least 6 foot tall. Her body is wiry muscle. She has tan skin and whips of russet hair coming out of her cap. Eventually, Leonie does end up helping the girl who is stuck in the stirrup. Nina and the tall girl end up having a little bit of a heated exchange. Nina's trying to keep up their disguise, that they're these traveling merchants, and that they're probably disapproving of what's going on. Nina even brings up, oh, well, we're staying at the convent, and what would the well mother say if she found out that we knew about this? Because she's posing as a Fjerdan woman, she has to basically leave the decision of whether they're going to tell on them or not up to Audric, because he's the man. Audric makes the decision not to tell on these group of girls because, hey, if we're not going to tell the well mother that we saw you up here, there's no way that you're just going to bring up in conversation that you saw us up on this mountain where we're really not supposed to be. Because I'm sure that they were looking pretty suspicious. Even as they're walking up to the group when they thought they were soldiers, they're like,
oh, what? We're on the mountain? Look at that. Where are we? Huh?
So it's getting late and Audric wants to head back, but the whispers in Nina's head are kind of driving her forward. So she says that she's going to stay out and do a little bit more exploring of the fort. As she makes this choice to keep on exploring, the voices in her head are getting really excited. She compares their excitement to either a crowd getting ready to watch a play or a crowd at an execution. And I'm probably leaning toward the excitement over an execution because her powers come from Death. Nina doesn't really follow the path that they used coming up the mountain. She ends up just using the voices to follow where they want her to go. So Nina ends up around the back of the building and she sees that it's really fallen into disrepair. There's only a couple of guards out back. She gets a better view of the reservoir and it actually has an ash tree carved into it. She talks about how it was probably blessed whenever they built it because water plays a large part in their religion. So she's kind of surprised whenever she sees all of this dirt and mud that's around the reservoir gate because this would make their god very unhappy. She even says that soiling his waters is a crime. So this is all very suspicious and I'm wondering if these guys are even real soldiers or maybe they're just these guys that were hired by the Fjordan government to pose as soldiers to do these weird things inside the factory. As she's standing there, Nina reaches out with her power and she even starts comparing Death to this current that's washing over her that she can feel where it's ebbing and flowing. And she actually gets really caught up in this moment. And it takes Matthias's voice to call her back. And the fact that Death wanted to claim her in that moment is kind of like some Final Destination stuff. Did Death feel like they lost out on claiming a soul and so he's always keeping an eye on Nina and that's why she has her powers? Even the waters of Death don't feel cold to Nina. They feel very welcoming. As Matthias brings Nina back from the pool that Death had on her, all of the voices kind of calm down, all of the shouting. She just hears women crying. She realizes that women and girls by the hundreds are dead. Where she is standing, she is surrounded by graves. And that's how the chapter ends. And this chapter leaves me with
so many questions.
So like I said, my questions are, is this fort just a front? You know, are the soldiers even really soldiers? And I know Nina can't smell Jerda, but I'm wondering if the people in this factory have found another substance that they can use to make some kind of parem. And the reason why I wonder this is because the women that went missing that Nina knew of were 3 Grisha women from her group of refugees she was supposed to get on the boat. So what if they're using just women because they don't even think women are very useful, let alone Grisha women? And they're doing these experiments on them or using them to further their tech. Obviously, they're dying from this addiction and they're just putting them into these mass graves that Nina finds. And why is Death calling Nina?
Oh my god, my phone just shut.
Is it that Final Destination vibe or is it something else? Is it something more? I mean, is Death really calling Nina?
Or is Nina calling Death?
And I felt like everything was starting to tie together in this chapter. There's a lot of talk of the Fjordan god, there's a lot of talk about the rivers, and there's a lot of talk about how their religion works, how water is important, and then these soldiers are just coming and soiling the water and have no regard for it. Nina even compares Death to a current in a body of water. And then this might be a stretch, but I'm wondering if the Fjordan magic or the Fjordan god has some kind of connection to Death itself. Like maybe he's some kind of god of death and destruction or the underworld, especially because it's very important for them to be reburied in a certain place that's close to him so their souls can come back. Yet again, I really love how everything with their religion and what's going on and what Nina is finding is all starting to connect. So I am just dying to figure out exactly what's going on here. And a small disclaimer for this video and my last one, I had to change my setup a bit and end up using my phone to record, so I'm really sorry if the quality or the sound isn't quite the same. I thought my camera was charged, but it turns out the cord I was using was broken and it didn't charge at all.
YouTuber problems, figuring them out as I go.
But I really appreciate you guys for being here and thank you so much for joining me for chapter 5. Can't wait for another Nina chapter. I can't wait to figure out what's going on here. The mystery is just so important to me. And I really feel like this mystery is going to be connected to everything throughout the book, and maybe near the end we'll see how everything is all tied together. So I'm loving this book so far. I cannot wait to talk to you guys about the next chapter. Have a great day wherever you are. See you soon.